In this session, we'll be building on top of our existing Java text editor source. The last time we added a nice little toolbar here that actually doesn't do anything just yet, as well as menu accelerators and mnemonics. In this session, we'll actually be adding a multi-tab view so we can manage multiple documents in the same document window. So as an example, this here is our default tab, and we're using tab panes to get this done. But we can optionally spawn multiple other new documents alongside our existing default tab and switch between them. So as you can see here, we can switch between these documents. Keep in mind also that our pop-ups still work. Okay, so we can switch between the documents and still access our typical pop-up context menu as we typically would. To actually accomplish this here, we'd find that we'll have to separate out the actual text editor component itself. We use the JTextArea as well as the pop-up itself. So we'll actually have to register that same pop-up on the respective instance loaded in the respective tab. So it's a bit complex in terms of the mechanism, but we can step you through in terms of achieving this. Now, the first thing that we'll need to do, if you just go to your IDE, is create this class called TextEditorArea. Alright, so go ahead and right-click under the jtexteditor.ui package and create a class called TextEditorArea. Alright, so once that class is created by your IDE, it should look something like this. And this class is the class that I was mentioning. This class will represent our isolated text editor itself, so we can create multiple instances of it, one per each spawned tab, to hold its own content. And we'll need that in a multi-tabbed arrangement, as you saw earlier. So we'll actually be piggybacking on the JTextArea class in the Java API. So it's basically essentially going to be a JTextArea. It's not going to be very complex at first. Essentially, it needs to just hold its own data. So we're gonna build on top of the existing JTextArea constructors and behaviors and so forth. So we're going to throw in its own constructor, but we're just going to essentially just pass it off to its parent's constructor using the super here. We also want to create a constructor to initialize it with content, just in case down the road we'll have to actually open up documents and have the contents of the document loaded in the particular text area of the particular tab. So we'll need another constructor. We're actually overloading in this case, and this particular constructor will contain an argument. We call it content of type string, and that will be passed to the constructor of the JTextArea, which does facilitate initialization with respect to content. And this is basically it. This is all we need for our custom class, which represents the editor component in our design. Now, heading over to the UI itself, we'll have to make some modifications here. So open up the text editor UI, and first of all, we'll have to disable our default JTextArea instance, as you see here. So we're just going to comment that out. We're going to have to comment out parts later on down in the code. So we're actually going to take this out and swap in our text editor area that we've just created, but we're going to do it in the right places, right? So in addition to commenting that out, we'll need to actually go down, scroll down to the portion where we actually set up our text editor area, rather a text area itself, and comment those two lines out as well. So we're actually going to take out the default text area within the text editor UI that we had before and just comment those lines out. And we're going to also proceed to comment out the listener that's set up on top of that text area, because we're going to have that listener attached to every single newly spawned instance of our text editor area itself that is created within the application window itself. So we'll take this out. We'll just comment that out for now. And again, if things are running on too quickly, you can always pause, rewind, and so forth. Okay, and also make note of the line numbers as well for quick reference. So we can continue. So the next thing that we'll do is we'll add a global reference to our pop-up menu. The reason why we're going to need that is because we want to reuse our pop-up on every single text editor area instance that's spawned in our multi-tabbed editor. All right, so we're going to actually declare our pop-up as a global variable, and again, like I mentioned, we need to make this global to facilitate reusing of the same pop-up for all editor tabs. That's the reason why we're going to make it global. All right. The next thing that we do is we're going to edit. We're going to take out the final pop-up menu pop-up here, and we're going to take that out and just leave pop-up. So the instance pop-up here will reference the global instance up here. Okay. All right, so it wouldn't be local to the constructor anymore. It will be global, so we can access it outside of the constructor to reference the same instance. Okay. The next thing that we do is we're going to add our tab pane. Now, the tab pane itself is going to be managing all of our text editor area instances, and the tab pane basically is a really good component for organizing multiple views while saving space in your UIs, and this is exactly what we need in this case. So we're going to declare a global tab pane instance, and then we're going to set it up just above where we commented out our daytext area. So we're going to set up a tab pane with a couple of lines, tab pane equal new j tab pane. Remember, we had already declared this global earlier. So we're just instantiating it here inside of the constructor, and then we're going to add it to the frame. All right. So the tab pane will appear. However, unless we actually add tabs to it, we won't necessarily see anything just yet. And we're adding the tab pane where we previously had our text area scroll pane, which is in the center of our frame itself. All right. Next, we're going to start to build a mechanism to manage the multi-tabbed environment. All right, and we'll need a special method to do that. Our first method, will create the text editor area instance and add it to the frame in a new tab of the tab pane. All right, so we'll call this method add text editor tab. Okay. And we'll give it a couple of arguments, the first of which is the title of the tab. And we'll need this later on down the line when we have to deal with opening of files, so we'll initialize the title of the tab with the name of the file. All right? And the second argument will be content. Again, we'll need it later on down the line when we'll need to initialize the content visible inside of those text editor areas based on what's inside of the contents of what's inside of the file itself. Okay, so once we have this method set up, one of the first things that the method would do is create the text editor area. And now this is going to be a final. We're basically going to have to declare it as final simply because later on down, as you'll see, we'll set up the mouse listener on it to bring up the contextual menu or the pop-up menu as we had it before. So we're basically taking the code that was basically in a constructor before, and we're started creating an adaptation of that same code that set up the default text area so that we can set up our text editor areas within the particular tab. So the first line here really just instantiates our current instance of the text editor area, and it's going to pass in any content passed in through this method here. All right, so it's just going to forward that content onto the text editor area so that it will initialize with content if it needs to. All right. The second thing that we do in this method is we'll add the mouse listener. Just like we mentioned earlier, we'll still need the pop-ups to work on the respective text editor areas, but we don't want to create an instance of a pop-up for every single instance of our text editor area. This is why we created a global reference to the pop-up itself, so we can reuse that again and again and again for every single text editor area that it's spawned within a tab. All right, so we want to register that just the same way that we registered it on our original text area. So we'll just do TextEditor dot add mouse listener. Basically, it's all of the code that we commented out earlier. So we have our overridden mouse pressed and our overridden mouse released. And as you can see here, it references the global pop-up instance that was set up earlier. All right. And then the final thing that we do in this particular method is add the component, the text editor component itself, our custom component, to the tab pane in a scroll pane, of course. So this particular line gets that done. So we do tab pane dot add tab, and then we specify the title. Like I mentioned, this title can come in from the top here when we call this particular method, and it can be the name of the file that we've opened, for instance. And the second argument takes in the component that must be displayed inside of that tab pane, and that will be our JScroll pane, which wraps our text editor instance. Okay. Now we'll also need a method to handle the closing of our tabs. So as long as we can spawn them, we will need something to close them. Okay. So we'll start this method. This method will be called remove selected text editor tab, and the method itself will first of all, grab the active tab, because that's basically the basis of its function, to be able to know which tab is currently active and close that particular tab within the tab pane. So the way that we can grab the current active tab is to call the tab pane's get selected index method. Okay, and that will return a particular value that corresponds with the index position of the particular tab in the tab pane, and we will save that in a variable called selected tab index. The next thing that we do is just remove it. So the tab pane has these convenience methods, one of which is remove tab at, which takes an index position of a particular tab and removes it. So this basically essentially just accomplishes that task. It's a very simple method, remove selected text editor tab. All right. So again, the way it works is that it identifies which tab is currently selected. It grabs the index of that selected tab and then tells the remove tab add method within the tab pane to remove that tab at the particular selected index. Okay. Now here comes the big guy. So here we need to set up a listener to be able to interpret events from our toolbar as well as from our menu items. Namely, we're going to set up this listener specifically to handle the events right now that come in from our new toolbar item as well as our new file menu item. All right. The new basically spawns a new file or creates a new file. Similarly, we're going to set up also a mechanism to respond to the close toolbar item and the close menu item as well. I believe that there is only the close inside of the menu item, so we'll just focus on that as a menu item in that. So basically, we're going to create a class, a subclass, make it private, called TextEditorEventListener. And we can continue to build on this class for other events that may come, that we'll need to handle, such as select all, cut, copy, paste, etc. So we'll set up a single event listener class, and because it's going to listen for events, it needs to implement action listener. Okay. But for now, we're just going to focus on responding to the new and the close events. So it needs to override action performed, and we need to do a couple of things in there. Again, because we're going to be dealing with interpreting events from a toolbar as well as our menu items, we're going to have to set up conditions to interpret where it's actually coming from. And within those conditions, we're going to have to interpret what is actually done. So the first of which is to take care of what's triggering the action. So we do evt.getSource, which returns the actual object that has triggered the action, which is very useful for us, particularly when we want to interpret what has actually triggered the action. So here's a mechanism that we use. So we say if the source is an instance of a JMenu item, that means it's coming from our menu system, then we can do, we can handle a few things. And these menu items will have labels, so we can handle them in a traditional way, such as evt.getAction command. And as we know, evt.getAction command can actually return the label of the particular menu item or the label of the button that is clicked. So we can easily interpret what has been clicked by using this particular case, only if it's an instance of a J menu item. We'll see that it's a bit different for the J buttons in the toolbar, since they have no labels whatsoever to go with. All right, so right now we've created the first case, which is new. So we're looking for the new label on the particular object that has been clicked. And if it's new, then we're going to call our add text editor tab method that we just created earlier. This particular method up here. All right, that would spawn a new tab based on the title and some content. But since it's a brand new tab, it's not being opened from a file, we're gonna set a default title, call it new text document, and we're gonna give it nothing as content. All right. Similarly, we're gonna have to take care of the close operation, and we're gonna call the corresponding method remove selected text editor tab, just like that. So that takes care of handling the new and the close events triggered from our menu system. All right. Now we're going to take care of events coming from our toolbar system. So we check here to see if the source of our triggered event is actually an instance of a J button, which means that it's definitely a toolbar button in that case. Then we're going to handle it a bit differently, because these toolbar buttons just have icons and tooltip text on them. There's no label to interpret, to be used for interpretation when considering evt.getAction command, for instance. So we'll have to get a bit more creative in this case, and what we do here is we actually try to grab the tooltip text. This is basically a method that can be used. Other methods may involve comparing the object itself with toolbar buttons, but that's a bit tedious because you'll have to have every single instance distinguished in the toolbar. But this particular approach I find is particularly convenient. It involves less coding. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually grab the tooltip text using that method off of our object itself. So we're going to call the evt.getSource, which grabs the object. We're going to cast it back into a J button so we can call our get tooltip text on top of that. And once we do that, we'll be able to interpret based on the tooltip text that we gave our toolbar buttons to begin with. So we're looking for new document as our tooltip text. In that case, we know that it's the new button, and we call our add text editor tab just as before with the default arguments. Similarly, as I was mentioning, there's no corresponding close toolbar option. So we're basically through here with respect to our event listener. Okay, so that's basically done. The next thing that we need to do is to set up our listener on the respective buttons that must be involved in the actions that we've designed. Okay, so we jump to our source where we find our first menu item here, which is the new menu item here, the menu item that represents the new option, the new operation. And we are going to add the listener to trigger the spawning of the tab when clicked. Now remember, our listener itself is basically designed to be a subclass. All right, and the name of our subclass is TextEditorEventListener. So we'll have to do our routine add action listener, but we're going to create an instance of that subclass, as you'll see here in a bit. So we'll do new menu item here, okay, which is our reference here. Add action listener, and inside of that we're going to put new text editor event listener. Now there's another way that we can do this. We can actually just instantiate this once and then just keep throwing the reference in again and again and again. But you know, this is basically the approach that I've fallen into here, so I'll just stick to it. So this is the first listener that we've set up on the new menu item option. We're going to continue to add that. In this case, we're going to add a listener to the close menu item. Again, it's the same approach. So basically, it's close menu item, which is the menu item in question, that add action listener, new text event listener. Okay. And we're going to do this for our toolbar as well. So head down to the source code that sets up your toolbar, and we're going to add the listener button for the new button. So in this case, it's called a new button, and we're going to do add action listener as before, new text event listener. So once we have those listeners in place, registered on those items, we'll be able to actually click on them. They'll be able to be interpreted, and then we'll be able to trigger the corresponding methods to spawn the tabs and close them respectively. All right. Now, one of the last things that we'll do here is set up our UI. Just head to the end of the constructor just before we initialize, you know, some bits on it. We're gonna add the first tab by default because we want our text editor to open up with at least one tab in it, a default tab. We're just gonna call our add text editor tab method again. All right, so that method in itself has proved quite useful. All right, so once we have these things in place, then we'll be able to execute, clean and execute our code, and we'll be witnessing the extensions that we've just added. So it spawns the editor window. You'll be able to see your first tab spawn because of the last bit of code that we added here. All right, and we'll be able to click on this and spawn a new tab, as you see here, and we'll be able to switch between them. All right. Now, if you'd like a particular tab to be closed, we can select a particular tab, head to the file menu, and hit close. All right, and it closes. Okay. All right.